as our sister city of San Antonio, Florida. And I'd like to ask, very importantly, where were your ancestors in 1890? I think it's worth reflecting on where your family history was at that particular time. In my case, on my father's side, I had at least one grandparent in the United States. I think they were already property owners. On my mother's side, we're still back in the old country. So put it in perspective. Rerum Novarum was an encyclical issued by Pope Leo XIII. It's titled Rights and Duties of Capital and Labor. It was issued on the 15th of May in 1891. It was an open letter passed on to all Catholic patriarchs, primates, archbishops, and bishops that addressed the conditions of the working class. It was subtitled On the Conditions of Labor. Pope Leo articulated the Catholic Church's response to the social conflict in the wake of capitalism and industrialization. It supports the rights of labor to form unions, rejects both socialism and unrestricted capitalism, while affirming the right to private property. Leo attempted to persuade Catholics to concentrate less on politics and more on the, quote, social question. The goal was the restoration of order and authority. Sound familiar? In his last years, Pope Leo appealed to the faithful to show due respect for civil and ecclesial powers. For greater context, consider that the civil government of Italy was under King Umberto I, son of Victor Emmanuel II, from 1878 to 1900, whose reign was more or less overlapped by the reign of Pope Leo. Now, as a fundamental principle of the document, to respect their workers' dignity in the workplace, employers should give time off from work to worship God, to fulfill family obligations, give periods of rest, not expecting work for long hours that preclude adequate sleep, not require work under immoral conditions that endanger the soul, pay a fair daily wage for which employees should give a full day's work. Now, I realize that much of this sounds like it's directed right at the American situation, but certainly the encyclicals are designed for the church worldwide, including Europe. The encyclical contained a proposal for a living wage, although the text does not use that term. The wording is very interesting, at least to me. Quote, wages ought not to be insufficient to support a frugal and well-behaved wage earner. Just makes you wonder what qualified as a well-behaved wage earner in 1891. According to Pope Leo, the civil government should not intrude into the family, the basic building block of society. However, if a family finds itself exceeding distress due to illness, injury, or natural disaster, this extreme necessity should be met with public aid, since each family is part of the Commonwealth. Now, the Commonwealth is another word more commonly used. You could substitute the word state. Commonwealth is an English word, a combination of the words common and wealth. There was an earlier time when wealth meant less about your bank account and more about well-being. So the term Commonwealth makes a great deal of sense. In the U.S., we have 4 commonwealths: Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Virginia. 2 territories, Puerto Rico, and I believe the Lower Mariana Islands. Okay, now, regarding the impact and legacy. In one sense, I think we are living it. So much has happened since then for which we are the beneficiaries that you can trace back improvements in living conditions to the efforts of Pope Leo XIII at that time. I certainly don't want to give the impression that Leo XIII has sole responsibility for all the good that has happened in the workforce since that time. More objectively, Rerum Novarum has been interpreted as both a criticism of the illusions of socialism and a primer of the Catholic response to the exploitation of workers. Probably no other pronouncement on the social question has had so many readers or exercised such a wide influence. It has inspired a vast Catholic social literature, while many non-Catholics have acclaimed it as one of the most definitive, definite, and reasonable documents ever written on the subject. This brief description is from an entry in the 1911 Catholic Encyclopedia. Now, for a different spin on Pope Leo XIII, I'd like to turn to an example from the secular media. I had the good fortune to come across a magazine called Puck magazine. The title is Puck, as in hockey. It has nothing to do with hockey. It was the first successful humor magazine in the United States, featuring colorful cartoons, caricatures, and political satire of the issues of the day. It was published from 1871 until 1918. Puck played an important role as a nonpartisan crusader for good government and the triumph of American constitutional ideals. Its prime targets were unjust or corrupt machine politicians. So far, what's not to like? However, the magazine condemned what it called the nefarious political agenda of the Catholic Church, especially Pope Leo XIII. New York City's infamous Tammany Hall, committed to spoils and patronage as a means of dominating the body politic, was all the more dangerous to Puck because, beginning in the 1870s, Irish Catholics dominated it. The Hall's Irish Catholic base enabled the magazine to rationalize more completely its conviction that the Catholic Church, ruled by a foreign potentate dressed in the irrational garb of infallibility, was a menace not only to the nation's body politic, but also to its democratic soul. If allowed to proceed unimpeded, the Pope, along with Tammany's bosses and supporters, would convert the nation into their personal fiefdom. That's quite a statement. I like your response, shaking your head no. In cartoons and editorials spanning 2 decades, the magazine blasted and often conjoined both Tammany and the papacy with invidious comparisons that left few readers in doubt as to their sympathies. This very colorful report is on Wikipedia. On this eve of St. Patrick's Day, may we be mindful of the challenges all minorities, have faced in their quest for acceptance and assimilation into the mainstream of U.S. culture. Okay. In 1891, and I'm at a nice point where I can shift to something more less intense. I'd like to introduce the name of Henry George, who wrote and published The Condition of Labor, an open letter to Pope Leo XIII. While I have not reviewed his long response, he was a highly respected American political economist and journalist. His writing was immensely popular in the 19th century America and sparked several reform movements of the progressive era. His most famous work, Progress and Poverty, published in 1879, sold millions of copies worldwide. The treatise investigated the paradox of increasing inequality and poverty amid economic and technological progress, the business cycle, and the anti-monopoly reforms as a remedy for these and other social problems. Other works by Henry George defended free trade, the secret ballot, and public ownership of certain natural monopolies. He died suddenly in 1897 while running for mayor of New York City at the age of 58. I highly recommend going to Wikipedia to read about him. The description of his large funeral in New York City is alone worth the effort. Continuing with the era of Pope Leo XIII. John Augustine Ryan, born in 1869 to 1945, was an American Catholic priest who was a noted moral theologian and advocate of social justice. His Doctor of Sacred Theology dissertation was an influential early economic and moral argument for minimum wage legislation. He published A Living Wage in 1906 when he was about 37 years of age. 10 years later, Ryan's second major scholarly work was the book Distributive Justice, the Right and Wrong of Our Present Distribution of Wealth, in which he provided an examination regarding rent from land, interest on capital, profits from enterprise, and wages for labor in relation to moral principles. In his autobiography, he said, "While a living wage has achieved a higher degree of recognition," Ryan stated, "Distributive Justice is unquestionably the most important book I have written." Now, where did he get that inspiration to do all that as a Catholic priest and a moral theologian? Ryan was born in Vermilion, Minnesota, the oldest of 11 children. Ryan's childhood experience with the challenges faced by farmers influenced his early interest in economic justice and the role of the Catholic Church in promoting social change. His interest in moral reflection and contemporary economic issues and empathy for the poor was further cultivated in his early teenage years when he read Henry George's Progress and Poverty. What an outstanding example. Now, I have a short break here. I'm going to help you make the leap from the Pope Leo era to the Pope Francis era. I happened to see online today a trivia question. And the question is, in what year did the Vatican become an independent state as it is today? I've just turned to Father David, our trivia buff. Extremely close. My source said 1929, but we will give Prior Lucius a break. Okay, how are we doing on time? Hey, we're rolling right along. Okay. My next topic has to do with something very contemporary and I think relatively universal, the topic of ecology, the environment. Micah D. Kyle, PhD, is Associate Professor of Theology at St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa. He has a BA in Music Performance from St. John's University, Collegeville, and an MDiv and PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary. The Liturgical Press published his book in 2017. Title, Apocalyptic Ecology. Subtitle, The Book of Revelation, the Earth and the Future. From the back cover, the author of the Book of Revelation struggled, as we do today, to live out a Christian faith in the context of an empire trampled and destroyed the earth and its creatures. In this book, Kyle will look at how and why Revelation was written, along with how it has been interpreted across the centuries, to come to an understanding of its potential contribution to a modern environmental ethic. While the book of Revelations is replete with images of destruction of the earth, Kyle shows readers, through Revelation's ancient context, a message of hope that calls for the care of and respect for the environment. The book of Revelation was written in the specific context of the Roman Empire. This context posed serious challenges to the Christian community, challenges that were social, theological, political, and economic. The Bible's environmental legacy, a sharp two-edged sword. I'm going to read one paragraph from the book that I found particularly appropriate. The Bible's, we have embedded in our culture certain traditions that justify our exploitation and destruction of the environment. In a widely cited article from 1967, more than 50 years ago, Lynn Wright lays responsibility for the environmental crisis at the feet of Christian tradition. White's arguments form the starting point for virtually every theological book on the environment, because he states the problem simply and clearly. Humans, he says, are conditioned by beliefs about our nature, destiny, that is, by religion. He goes on to say, more science and more technology are not going to get us out of the present ecologic crisis until we find a new religion or rethink our old one. And let me assure you, I have no interest in proposing a new religion. I am strongly in favor of option 2, using our brains to elevate the one we have. Okay. Now, let me move on to kind of the main menu or the main dish of this, something of a social justice smorgasbord. It's a encyclical from Pope Francis, issued in last October, on the 3rd of October, on the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. The title is Fratelli Tutti, which translates to On Fraternity and Social Friendship. I'd like to step back and say that in my mind, and the presidents of the United States routinely give an annual State of the Union address. Well, this is something like Pope Francis's State of the World address on a very wide range of topics. As I recall from it goes on for something like 120 pages, and it's about 280 paragraphs, rather. So I am only going to give you maybe 6 paragraphs that I selected I thought you could relate to without hearing, skipping around from one to another. And so paragraph number 1, Fratelli Tutti. With these words, St. Francis of Assisi addressed his brothers and sisters and proposed to them a way of life marked by the flavor of the gospel. Of the counsels Francis offered, I would like to select the one in which he calls for love that transcends the barriers of geography and distance, and declares blessed all those who love their brother as much when he is far away from him as when he is with him. In his simple and direct way, St. Francis expressed the essence of a fraternal openness that allows appreciate and love each person regardless of physical proximity, regardless of where he or she was born or lives. Paragraph 6 is a rather general disclaimer, a statement of modesty. The following pages do not claim to offer a complete teaching on fraternal love, but rather to consider its universal scope, its openness to every man and woman. I offer this social encyclical as a modest contribution to continued reflection and hope that in the face of present-day attempts to eliminate or ignore others, we may prove capable of responding with a new vision of fraternity and social friendship that will not remain at the level of words. Although I have written it from the Christian convictions that inspire and sustain me, I, Francis, sought to make this reflection an invitation to dialogue among all people of goodwill. And I think that includes you tonight. I think I have the power to extend that invitation to you. Okay. Now, moving on to paragraph 13. As a result, and he's referring to what preceded this, there is a growing loss of the sense of history, which leads to even further breakup, a kind of, quote, deconstructionism, whereby human freedom claims to create everything starting from zero, is making headway in today's culture. The one thing that leaves in its wake is the drive to limitless consumption. expressions of empty individualism. Concern about this led me to offer the young some advice. And I'm blessed to have some young here tonight. If someone tells young people to ignore their history, to reject the experiences of their elders, to look down on the past, and to look forward that he himself holds out, doesn't it then become easy to draw them along so that they only do what he tells them? He needs the young to be shallow, uprooted, and distrustful, so that they can trust only in his promises and act according to his plans. That is how various ideologies operate. They destroy or deconstruct all differences so they can reign unopposed. To do so, they need young people who have no use for history, who spurn the spiritual and human riches inherited from past generations, and are ignorant of everything that came before them. Paragraph 46. We should also recognize the destructive forms of fanaticism are at times found among religious believers, including Christians. They too can be caught up in networks of verbal violence through the internet and various forms of digital communication. Even in Catholic media, limits can be overstepped. Defamation and slander can become commonplace, and all ethical standards and respect for the good name of others can be abandoned. How can this contribute to the fraternity that our common Father asks of us? Paragraph 89. Nor can I reduce my life. And the preceding, actually I want to go back and do it. It'll make a lot more sense if I do paragraphs 88 and 89 together. 88 is very short. In the depths of every heart, love creates bonds and expands existence, for it draws people out of themselves and towards others. Since we were made for love, in each one of us, a law of love seems to operate. The lover goes outside the self to find a fuller existence in another. For this reason, man always has to take up the challenge of moving beyond himself. Paragraph 89. Nor can I reduce my life to relationships with my small group, even my own family. I cannot know myself apart from a broader network of relationships, including those that have preceded me and shaped my entire life. My relationship with those whom I respect has to take account of the fact that they do not live only for me, nor do I live only for them. Our relationships, if healthy and authentic, open us to others who expand and enrich us. Nowadays, our noblest social instincts can easily be thwarted by self-centered chats that give the impression of being deep relationships. On the contrary, authentic and mature love and true friendship can only take root in hearts open to growth through relationship with others. As couples or friends, we find that our hearts expand as we step out of ourselves and embrace others. Closed groups and self-absorbed couples that define themselves in opposition to others tend to be expressions and mere self-preservation. Chapter 276. And we're obviously skipping over a good deal here. For these reasons, which just preceded, the church, while respecting the autonomy of political permission to the private sphere. On the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in building a better world or fail to reawaken the spiritual energy that can contribute to the betterment of society. It is true that religious ministers must not engage in the party politics that are popular domain of the proper domain of the laity. But neither can they renounce the political dimension of life itself, which involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for integral human development. The church has a public role over and above her charitable and educational activities. She works for the advancement of humanity and of universal fraternity. She does not claim to compete with earthly powers, but to offer herself as a family among families. This is the church, open to bearing witness in today's world, open to faith and hope and love for the Lord and for those whom he loves with a preferential love. A home with open doors. The church is a home with open doors because she is a mother. And in the imitation of Mary, Mother of Jesus, we want to be a church that serves, that leaves home and goes forth from its place of worship, goes forth from its sacristies in order to accompany life, to sustain hope, and to be a sign of unity, to build bridges, to break down walls, to sow seeds of reconciliation. And with that, I would like to say that through this point, and particularly with the Fratelli Tutti document, I see considerable compatibility with Prior Lucius's presentation last evening. Much of my talk has been very abstract. His talk helps bring it down to a very concrete level. I'd like to move on to some more reflections. One, I'd like to say, I'll share with you what inspired my talk. Number one, we have had Fratelli Tutti in the dining room as dining room reading. So I believe it is available online through the Vatican website. So if nothing else, I'm asking for you to become a friend of the wide topic of Catholic social teaching. And I think Fratelli Tutti is an excellent place to start. I think it's very down to earth. It's very descriptive of where we are in the world today. There are many obstacles. He talks about the obstacles to improving our society, how we relate to each other. He uses, I think, many examples. He uses scripture. I think he has a lot of common sense, and I think it's highly worth reading. My desire to have this topic was also inspired by my experience of dealing with customers in the gift shop and the issues that I hear them deal with. I think this is the beginning of a response to the angst that so many people we're feeling about life in general, even before 2020, and even more so since then. I think there's a certain amount of, document. On the one hand, there's a certain amount of not doom and gloom, but seriousness. On the other hand, there's considerable hope. And I would like to speak of that hope for just a bit. I think we need to ask each other, how do we move forward? What can we do? We are the local body of the church. We need to find a way to strengthen the local body of the church and to help Pope Francis respond as constructively as possible on this issue. I think it starts very much with the home, the foundation of the family, the foundation of society, I should say, and everything we can possibly do to strengthen that. I believe that I am kind of winding down on what I'd like to say. I would like to turn to, I know what I need to do. I need to flip back a page. One of the resources I looked at was on Catholic social teaching, and for the moment I don't seem to have the title in front of me. It's called Reclaiming Social Teaching by Anthony Esselon, and I thought I had my notes here describing who he is and what he does. He's an English professor with a Catholic Liberal Arts College in New Hampshire, not with the Benedictine affiliation. But anyway, here's a short quote from his book that I'd like to quote. Catholic social teaching isn't focused exclusively on serving the poor. It offers us a rich treasure of insights about the nature of man, his eternal destiny, the sanctity of marriage, and the important role of the family in building a coherent and harmonious society. We need the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church needs us. That is my closing argument. And as I move around a little, yes, I am open to questions. Friar Lucius.
Thank you, Brother James. Thank you for a nice lesson to see that the importance of looking out for one another has not just begun in the Pope Francis era, but centuries ago. If I may ask, what would you say is the common message between those beautiful documents you quoted tonight? If you had a favorite or one we could really take away with us this evening. Thank you.
I think the common theme between the Pope Leo document and the documents of Pope Francis, and there are numerous other ones, at least a list of them, that it's the Catholic Church's ongoing effort to look out for the little guy, the least advantaged people of persons in society. That is probably the common theme. Now, there's certainly guiding principles that are underlying, the most recent documents are built on the previous documents. So I'd like to regroup a little and expand on that, and maybe just say further that I see an opportunity for average lay people in the various parishes, lay people of goodwill who are strong Catholics, to increase their game, if you will. I think that's what it's going to take to begin to make a dent in improving our society. One of the things I know I had in the back of my mind to talk about is a little bit about the last paragraph I read, which is our illustrious political environment in which we find ourselves in. And I see at least one or two in the front row shaking their heads like, am I crazy? Of course, illustrious and, not the finest hour in my lifetime by any stretch. I'm not sure that there is a time, when was the peak of political dialogue and discourse in the United States in my lifetime? Well, it's easier to say when it wasn't than when it was. But I think part of the message of Pope Francis clearly is, it is a very direct attack on our system and our systems collectively. He is critical of everything, top to bottom, but I think in a very constructive way. So I think just as Pope Leo was trying to go forward, or forward, however you want to picture it, I think Pope Francis is calling us to go forward. One of the questions I get in the gift shop is about kneelers. Particularly this time of the year. And I'll just pose to you, in the big scheme of things, when I have read you a sample of this document, how important is the presence or non-presence of kneelers in a Catholic church to building a better society? I do not want to discredit those who place a high value on it, but I would say it would take a high value, it would take a strong commitment and a long period of time for us to look back to say the turning point was the restoration of kneelers in the Catholic Church. That's my way of illustrating the need to go forward. I think the church needs your help forward. Capitalism needs your help in going forward. That says a lot. Now, in that same vein, I wanted to get back to the brief thing on public service. Some of you already know that I have served for approximately 20 years as a Town of St. Leo commissioner. I have very limited experience in local government, but it has been valuable and rewarding. Question to you, or my most immediate question to you, under what conditions would you file the papers to run for public office? Or rephrasing it, under what conditions would you encourage a husband, a wife, son, daughter, friend, or relative to run for public office? The answer I'm expecting is, well, when we return to a higher level of civility, that is a starting point. I'm not sure what the future holds in terms of, are things going to get worse before they get better in public life? If I had one bit of insight to share with you, it is the idea that I'm not sure that the general public is ready for the truth. And I'm going to give you an example that I've thought of in preparation for this talk. It's a non-political approach to commenting on a political situation. It involves something very recent in the news. A week ago last Sunday, Oprah Winfrey had probably relatively high ratings when she interviewed Harry and Meghan. Now, I like the fairy tale. I watched the wedding. I did not see Oprah's interview with Harry and Meghan. But what I have noticed in the media reports is all of a sudden their popularity is down. That is my way of saying the general population of the U.S. is not interested in hearing the hard truths. They don't want to hear that the marriage is having a problem. They're not too, you can run for president based on the basics of the economy, safety, peace at home, peace in the world, and no new taxes, and you make no sacrifice. There's no way that we're going to make any progress on Fratelli Tutti without all of us at least considering some sacrifice that is going to have to stretch beyond what we've done in the past. I think we can applaud what the Catholic Church has done with the help of lay people from 1890 through the year 2020. But what we've done in the past is not enough to carry us forward to substantially improve the lives of people in society. One of the concerns I have, and I know the Abbott's starting to look at the clock. Okay, we're still okay on time. I want to give you an example of something that's of concern to me about the economics of just the current population in the United States, especially those who haven't quite made it yet. Are they going to be able to keep their heads above water, so to speak, or is it going to get worse? And I want to speak on the cost of getting married. I know that I've read an article about 5 years ago from the country of South Korea where a writer was appealing to the government to take steps to make it easier to get married and form a family because people were having increasing difficulties in her country to get married and start a family. Well, by my observation, a lot has changed, certainly in the last 50 to 60 years, in terms of the details of forming a family, starting a family, and we tend to get things out of order. So the marriage isn't always the first thing. I have found myself wondering about the economics of getting married and the social expectations of the wedding. And I will definitely say that the one thing I haven't touched on in this talk that I need to insert very much is the tug of war that I think all of us go through in terms of being in the Catholic culture and being in a secular culture. And I think we need to pull back very strongly in the direction of Catholic culture. Now, that's just my opinion. I think we need to pull some weeds out of our own gardens that I know I can safely say, even though I've been in the monastery for 30 years and have had some degree of separation from the world, I still have a significant interest in the world. I will always have an interest in the world. Okay, back to my idea. I believe that many families who are devout, strong Catholics find a way to get married in the Catholic Church. But just as we have scholarships and tuition relief for going to high schools, colleges, universities, I'm beginning to wonder if we need to come up with some endowment whereby we help local families get married in a church to have the sacrament of marriage as a foundation. Now, that is one thing that is, it's just one example of beginning to scratch the surface of what we could do better. It's not about helping people in another country. My strong perception is there's enough going on in the U.S. of A. right now that I don't even have to ask. The overwhelming sentiment is to say, let's help ourselves first. And I'm expecting you to help yourselves first in the process of helping others. The Catholic Church, St. Leo Abbey, your local parish, need to help you become a greater blessing machine in the world around that you have an influence on. You need to influence your family. I've heard great stories of the husband and wife that raise strong children to be strong Catholic children who marry a non-Catholic, and it's only a matter of time that, yes, the spouse converts to Catholicism. I think there are many sources of encouragement, but I think we need to be looking at our culture and reinvigorating our culture. And I think there are many sources in the Catholic marketplace to help you do that. Thank you.